Hello again. Yeah.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
You have to point it at your mouth.
I did.
Yeah, it's on. It's
Okay,
really,
okay. I'm more soft-spoken
Yeah.
than Anna.
I'm more loud spoken. This is Kiana. She's the executive director of Love the Neighborhood. She co-founded it 10 years ago. We're going to talk tonight about neighboring. We're going to piggyback a little bit off of what we talked about yesterday and talk about some of the challenges to teaching young adults today how to see and interact with the need that's around them on a day-to-day basis. And so, super, super excited. I just whenever I looked up here and you were on stage, I was like, I need to tell them 100 things about Kiana. But I think instead, I'm going to start by reading a passage from the Bible. So, click. Luke 10. Does anybody know off the cuff what this is? It is. Jesus is in it. This is the Good Samaritan, right? I mean, what better place to start a talk on neighboring than when Jesus talked about what it means to be a neighbor, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have my phone. That is what I'm reading. But in Luke 10, it says that a lawyer stood up to put Jesus to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" So Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And the lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this, you'll live." But he, the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, so we get a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes for the lawyer, asked Jesus a follow-up question, which is, boop, "But who is my neighbor? I'm supposed to love my neighbor, I'm supposed to love the Lord, and I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself. Who is my neighbor?" So Jesus tells this guy a story to presumably answer this question for him. So Jesus replied to this question, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving this guy half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion." Some of these words that are repeating, we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. So the word see, also the word compassion. So he had compassion after he saw him, and then he went to him and he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I'll repay you when I come back." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? So this is where Jesus landed, right? Who proved to be a neighbor? He didn't answer the guy's question. He didn't tell him who his neighbor was. He told this story. You're thinking that he's going to say one thing, and then he comes back and he says, who proved to be a true neighbor to this man? And the guy answered, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." And so what we're going to be talking about tonight is what it looks like to teach your students how to be a true neighbor, so that you'll see your students proof, increasingly to be neighbors to the people around them on their campus, right? So we've defined neighboring briefly. I think I have a slide, yeah? We left space on your little paper because I think that that's really fun to try to do, look at this passage and try to define it for yourself. But we're going to go ahead and tell you, I'm going to take my best shot at it. I don't think I can give you a perfect definition, but I know that whatever it is, it must involve seeing and caring. So it has to involve what we see the Samaritan do, which is he sees the guy in need, he stops, and then he acts with care towards this guy. So, tag.
Yep. So, so breaking this down, if we see that being a good neighbor is seeing and caring. The first part of that is seeing. So we are aware that there is something happening, there is a pain. So let's think back 100 years ago, before there was smartphones, before there was technology, before there was transportation, cars, airplanes, stuff like that. The people that were physically around us were pretty easy to see, and it was also a lot smaller. The pain, the hurt that we could see was a lot smaller. We couldn't see as much. It was pretty limited. So now let's fast forward to today. We literally have access to be able to see pain, hurt. Why are you looking at me? Is my mic?
Yeah, maybe we should hand it back and forth.
Ah.
Yeah, it sounds like your cable might be going in and out a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Oh, wait, listen to that.
So we're fast forwarding to today. We all have a smartphone. The young adults in our ministries have smartphones. They have the ability to see a lot of pain and hurt that's happening in the world. They have access to literally everything. We have access to everything. I can pull my smartphone out and see things happening anywhere in the world. So that's a little bit different. That's something that's a little bit different about Gen Z compared to previous generations. They can see people in need literally all over the world. So this leads us to challenge number 1. Gen Z sees everything. They're taking in a lot. So if half of being a good neighbor is seeing, and Gen Z is seeing so much, that's really going to impact the way that they're neighboring. That has an impact on them. So that is one of the things that we want to talk about. We want to talk about how do we address that challenge. Those are one of the challenges we want to focus on. How can we focus on neighboring on the people who live physically around us? So a little teaching tip here. We don't want to do this at the expense of, or we don't want to devalue those long-term relationships or those relationships online. Those are still important and valuable to Gen Z and to us. So we don't want to say, hey, stop talking to your mom back home. That's not helpful. As a mother, I would not like that to happen. But we want to teach them. So we're not going to devalue those long-term relationships. Those are relationships that aren't around us. But we want to teach students and people in our ministries, how do we prioritize the needs around us? So that is where we're going. So if we go back to the passage, we're going to do that real quick. We see in verse 31, and then again in verse 32, we see a priest and a Levite who saw, but it stopped there. That was it. We don't see the lawyer describing them as the true neighbors. So they did see, they had that first half, but not the second half. So I'm going to pass it back to Anna. Tell us about the second half.
Caring. So neighboring, it must involve seeing and caring. And when I'm talking about caring tonight, this is back to one of our words that shows up in the text. Caring has to involve compassion and action for it to be like full care. So caring is the bridge between seeing something, feeling, stirred up, and then having that energy actually drive you to bring about the positive change that you are feeling care about. And young adults today, they have a lot of compassion. It's actually something I think to be celebrated about young adults today. They can be stirred up, like to be really amped about different causes. If you talk to them about, needs, whether they be around them or on the other side of the world, they feel something. There's energy there, and that's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, this generation that you all are ministering to are seeing everything, and they're being asked to care boundlessly. But when you think about what care must involve, they can't really see that through, right? And I am gonna, talk a bit about that. For this generation, they find themselves in a position where care for them ends up being all compassion and no action, which is stunted care in a way. It's not fully what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, so an example that I wanted to bring here is, I really care about my kids. And if I have a lot of compassion for them, a lot of care for them, and then my child comes to me and says they're hungry, but I never take action, my child is going to continue to be hungry, they're going to become malnourished, and I'm probably going to get a reprimand. So we see this true compassion leads to or results in action. It naturally will happen when we truly care.
Yeah. I got you. So this brings us to challenge 2. Gen Z physically cannot act on all of the things that they feel compassion about, see, and care about. They literally, it's impossible. They don't have the time. They don't have the bandwidth. They can't act on it. So I want to walk this out, right? Gen Z, they have this boundless sight. They feel this call by society, by media, by their friends to be boundless in care, but they can't. So they end up with, honestly, like angst and numbness and hopelessness and anger, and it has nowhere to go. So I recommended a book called Voice of the Heart last night by Chip Dodd. This is stolen a bit from him, kind of made my own a little also. Anger. I don't want you to think about yelling at your dog because he clawed a hole in your door, which happened to me 2 hours ago. I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think about like that feeling where you learn something that is like really upsetting and you almost feel like physical energy. Like you feel like you haven't run a mile in a year and you could run 10 miles right now because you were just like, you were feeling something, and you see something wrong and you're like, I see this problem in the education system. I could start a school and help 100 people. I have so much energy. I can solve this now. And it's like, no, you probably can't, but like you feel like you can. There's energy in your body and in your spirit. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about anger right now. It's like a response to seeing something wrong that's like energizing. So anger is actually, in this type, a good thing. It leads to action. It leads to like growth and passion and like sort of spreading of passion, and it leads to change. This is how God made it, so that when we see wrong in our churches, in our jobs, in our relationships, we have the energy we need to address it, right? However, sometimes we can't. And the more and more that happens, the more and more that we're putting ourselves in positions where we're being like really emotionally stirred and energized, but we can't do anything. And I don't think we can completely avoid that. And there's faith that we have to have in those situations. But for young adults today, this is so much of what they're angry about. They are feeling this energy and they can't do anything. There's nothing for them. Because the stuff that they're feeling impassioned about is happening all around and it's not in their world, right? And so what happens whenever you can't have anger turn into what it's sort of meant to be, it goes the other direction and it turns to bitterness. One of the only ways to deal with it is to numb, which I mean, it's crazy how you can like look at terrible things and it doesn't really bother you anymore. You can develop a sense of apathy, or you can not do any of those things and just like spiral into despair and hopelessness and be really, really depressed, understandably so, because the world is filled with brokenness and terrible things and nobody can do anything about it. And so this is, I mean, many of your students, I'm sure you can see how this is a part of what they're dealing with day to day. And also, I think even for us, this is a part of what we deal with day to day. So now we've talked about some challenges, to talk about some solutions. And one solution is to prioritize neighboring. Thinking about neighboring as seeing and caring about the people around you in your day-to-day life. Talking to the people that are regulars on your walk to wherever. Knowing the people in the grocery store where you shop and checking up with them whenever you're going through. Like being regulars at places. And no, it could be the people around you, it could be the people around your workplace, but prioritizing neighboring. So this is going to come in 2 parts. 2-word solution. I'm focusing on neighboring. Kiana's going to focus on prioritizing. But yeah, one way to help solve this problem is to kind of teach your students to focus a little bit more on the people and the places that they can affect. Because your students can affect the culture in their dorms, and your students can affect their churches, and your students can affect their neighborhoods. And so teaching them to focus a little bit less, not saying entirely cut off, but focus a little bit less on what's happening in the whole world and focusing a little bit more on what's happening around them day to day. So if I threw it back to Rule of Life yesterday, the invitation is to be a person who sees and cares about what's happening around you increasingly, right? Resistance, and this is real, like, if you don't care about and know about the right things, you're going to be perceived as uninformed. You might be perceived as like being unthoughtful, uncaring, even hateful. There are some things that if you don't know about them, like, that's how you're going to feel, because people over here are going to be really excited about some cause and you don't know what's going on. You're going to feel dumb, and you're going to feel like a bad person for just not knowing that thing was happening, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a resistance to kind of prioritizing, focusing on what's going around you at the expense at times of knowing everything happening in the world all of the time. And then a commitment, or a few, might be, and it's not like a total cutoff. Maybe it's never listening to music when you walk to class, and literally just never having earbuds in when you're walking around your campus, and like praying for people as you pass them. And you'll start seeing people more. And you might even have conversations with people sometimes, you know? So it's not like I'm saying throw your phone away and never read the news. Now, that could be an invitation, like checking the news once a week, or going a month without like looking at online media or something like that. Or it could be actually like committing to volunteering with an organization in the neighborhood, right? So that you're actually seeing and engaging with the needs of your community, and you'll see some of that anger is gonna actually have the ability then to be fueled to impacting what's going around, which is gonna feel like really good and be really positive. So start seeing what's around you, your neighborhood and your neighbors, these places and people where you can actually affect change instead of constantly filling your mind with everything happening everywhere else that you really like can't affect. And you can pray. I'm not. Anyways.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the second part of this, the prioritizing. So we see Gen Z really values neighboring. So they really do value care for their actual physical neighbors, but that isn't the same thing as prioritizing. So they can place a high value on valuing, but prioritizing is low for them. So let me try to say this a different way. So maybe you are teaching on care for homelessness, and you talk about the value that caring for those around you that are in poverty has. The majority of people and Gen Z are going to agree that that is important and that Jesus cares about and values those things. Now, where you may get some pushback is if you ask them to forego hanging out with existing friends to go hang out with the homeless person outside the building. That's where you might get some pushback there. And this isn't just a Gen Z problem. It's easy to label it that, but really this exists in all of our hearts, in mine as well. So yeah, it's easier to prioritize what we already know, where we're already comfortable. It's a lot harder when it's an unknown and it makes us uncomfortable. So another example, say your student gets their schedule for the next semester. They realize they have an hour, a 2-hour chunk of time where they're free. And they have this beautiful window of free time that they are now like, what am I going to fill this with? If we encourage them to be intentional, to go hang out with somebody that they don't know, or they can look at their phone, or they can hang out with people that they already know, call a friend back home, we're going to prioritize the things that we already know, that we're already comfortable with. So that brings us to challenge number 3. Thank you. So Gen Z values neighboring directed at actual neighbors, at our physical neighbors that are around us, but they're resistant to prioritizing it over other types of relationships. So some of those other types are like existing relationships, people you already know, family, etc.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is ultimately we want to move from just valuing being a good neighbor to those around us and move to prioritizing it. So how do we do that? How do we move from valuing to prioritizing? That's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
So
Is it my turn?
passing it back to Anna.
Yeah. This really is like a big, big grind. So I had like an hour and a half conversation with our urban missionaries in our summer program. It was when it was only year-long folks at the time, but we went for like an hour and a half talking about this, and we're like, well, we all agree it's important, but they did not, like, the gap here, it's a big gap. Like challenging them when they see their limits to actually make life rhythms that are gonna get them out, actually meeting people and building relationships with people in their neighborhood. And you'll hear people, and you might even like over kind of spiritualize reasons why you don't want to do this. And I had, missionaries who came to join us, and they would say things like, well, I don't want to prioritize or say that this is more important than other things, because what if God calls me to do something else? Like, what if God is calling me to, have this online relationship versus this? I don't want to, just blanket prioritize this. There was like, and that could happen, but like there was so much pushback on focusing on the people around. And so as you start having these conversations, nudge, like, okay, I see that it's valuable. Like, would you do this instead of this? Or would you prioritize taking an hour a week or an hour every other week and focusing on this and actually putting that in your schedule and not doing other things because you're doing this? And you'll realize that there's a lot of resistance. And so there are 2 dangers that I see with that. One is if we only value and we don't prioritize, as Kiana said, we're not going to know the people around us. We're not going to know our neighbors in our houses. We're not going to know the people's names at the grocery store, because why would we? We're not going to know the baristas' names or stories. We're not going to know. I mean, some of your students might not even talk to the people around them in class. Like, we're not going to know. It's not going to happen. 2, and this is really big, it feels good to be compassionate. A lot of the time, you can get like a feel-good hit simply from being compassionate and valuing the things or the people that you see around you without doing anything. And this is a big way that like our society is working right now. Like, you are like, I care about the right things, meaning just be compassionate. I'm compassionate, I care about the right things, I'm a good person. And like that's like so much of social media, that's so much the water that your students are swimming in, and it's just really dangerous. I think that like the enemy is kind of there because people are feeling really good about themselves and they're not in positions where they're actually showing God's love to anybody except for just the people that are in there. And that's good, but we want to challenge them to be neighbors, right? To see and care about the people around them. So how do we bridge this gap? We suggest and have experienced that the way to bridge this gap is not to think about it. It's to actually jump in and start doing stuff. And so we want to talk to you guys for the rest of the time about what it looks like to just take steps to practice. And we believe that if this is something that you value and you start practicing it in small ways, it will become a priority as you experience it. So back to you.
Yeah, so I want to talk about practicing. So what do we do when we care about something but we aren't good at it yet? We practice. So I've been watching the Olympic trials for swimming, and I am a terrible swimmer. But if I did care about making it to the Olympics, what would I have to do? I would have to practice regularly. I would have to make time in my schedule. I would probably have to give up some things that I really enjoyed for the sake of learning to be a good swimmer? I would need to practice. And in order to practice correctly, if I'm training for the Olympics, I need to make sure I'm training in the right context. So if I'm training to be an Olympic swimmer, I'm not going to go out to my kids' kiddie pool and do laps. I mean, I guess you can't do laps. It's not big enough for that. But I would need to go to an Olympic-sized pool and do that. So we want to make sure that we are practicing in the right context, that we know our context really, really well. So for a lot of you, most of you, your college campus is your context and the area around it, the town that you're in, the city that you're in. So right now what we want to do is we want to pause and we want to do an exercise with you guys that's in your packets. So inside of it, there is a campus neighboring map. You'll see in there, it's fun little emojis on it. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to quickly go through this. Obviously, you can come back at any time and fill it out more extensively, but we just want to do a quick run through, and then we'll, after that, we'll do some table discussion. You guys can kind of talk about it. But what we want to do is on as many of those as you can, write down 3 places, so 3 of the closest coffee shops or churches or grocery stores or convenience stores, whatever it is, and then write down 2 or 3 people that you know that work or live there. And just do as much as you can in 3 minutes, and then we'll come back for table discussion. We'll throw some questions up here. Beep, go. Okay, I'm gonna bring us back. So something I was just telling Anna, we were like, oh, I wonder what I could have done. So something that I realized when I was thinking about this in my own life is there's some people that we think like, oh, they don't matter or they don't notice me. But I am an Aldi lover. And I frequent that grocery store, and I walked in once. I was pregnant with my second child, and the cashier was like, oh, you're pregnant again. And I was like, oh, this person has known me for over 4 years. Like, this person has known me for a long time, and I've just kind of written them off. So I think, like, it's easy to write people off that are in our lives all the time, or we think like, oh, they don't matter, they're not important, when really they actually are noticing us quite a bit. So that's just an example that comes to mind. So obviously we could spend the entire time on this. We could spend a lot of time. So feel free to keep doing this at any point, continue it. But for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next exercise, which is on the back of the campus neighboring map, onto the daily rhythms. So we want to think about now, so we kind of have, quickly thought about our context. Now we want to think about what are our personal daily rhythms, what's already happening in our life, where are we already going. So we're just going to do, first we're going to do step 1. So go through, circle the days of the week that you're at those places you listed. Are you there Monday through Friday? You're at this building. Are you there a couple days? Are you never there? So go through kind of quickly, circle those, and then circle the ones that you are at most often, so maybe the top 2 or 3 places that you go to, and then star the ones that the 2 or 3 that you are at the least amount of time. And then after this, we'll do a little table discussion. We'll do a table discussion. So as you guys are doing that, I kind of want to talk about the goal here, going back to rule of life yesterday that Anna talked about. So if our invitation is to be more connected to the world physically around us, so that's the invitation, then there can be some resistances to that. Like, I don't want to change the way that I walk to my classes or my job. I like doing this. I'm already connected to these people. I don't want to get to know new people. So just be honest as you're kind of thinking about your rhythms. What does it look like to connect more with people at places that you frequently go to? So my, resistance was, I'm just in Aldi. I'm just trying to get through the checkout line, the invitation, was that I could say hi and strike up a conversation with somebody. So just kind of notice what's coming up, what are the resistances, and then what are a couple ideas for how you can be more strategic and how you connect more with the people and places around you, so those commitments. So kind of just thinking back to yesterday. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to circle the ones you're at most often, star the ones you're at least often. Then we'll do another break for a table discussion.
So you've done a little self-assessing just for yourself and come up with some ideas on your own. So we want to now take our last I'm pretty sure it's our last little wave, like our second to last little wave of talking, to share with you guys some ideas that might be able to be some practice for you guys. These are things that we do in our personal lives that we've encouraged our missionaries to do in the neighborhood that we're in right now. And so just some ways to practice. And I'm going to hit this again later, even more hard. This is not just for your students. You can't teach this stuff and not do it. They're going to see right through that. You have to, and also this stuff is, people say caught, not taught. This stuff, if I'm walking with one of our urban missionaries around the neighborhood and I'm not acknowledging and talking to people, that's communicating something to the urban missionary that I'm with. If I'm walking with one of our urban missionaries and we run into somebody on the street who they would think I have no business knowing, and then I'm like, yo, whatever their name is, how's your mom? I know she was sick last week. That's going to also go a long way with the person that I'm with. And so we're talking about this stuff. Brainstorm what you can do for your students, but also this is for you. And you can't teach this if you're not going to take a shot at it yourself. It will not be good. So one, go for walks without your phone. You can leave it in your pocket or whatever, but we are so quick to look at our phones whenever we're waiting for the bus. I don't know if you guys ride the bus, whenever we're walking around and stuff. But I would say also take walks for no reason, just to notice stuff. And do that without a device. Strike up conversations with people. We do this thing during our training week. We call it City Quest, and I basically send our team in pairs all over the city and make them take public transportation, tell them to have 5 conversations with people, and tell them they're not allowed to use their phones, so they have to ask people how to get to where they're supposed to go. And it's crazy. The conversations they have, it'll be somebody will stop them and people will show up 2 hours late because they're like, oh, JoJo was telling me your life story and I didn't want to break it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so go for walks, don't look at your phone, and try to talk to people. Oh, I got slides for these. Go for walks without your phone. Kiana, oh.
Yes, so we want to ask good questions with the intention to get to know people. So ask, what their favorite restaurant, their coffee shop, their favorite movie. I don't know if you guys know, but we have this deck of cards that has a lot of questions that you can ask students. So if you're like, I don't know, or I just feel weird just asking questions, you can take a card out and say, hey, today my goal is to just ask 5 people this question. I know it's weird, but I have this card game. So some people find that helps kind of take the awkwardness out of it. Up to you. Some people are full of questions and you do not need any help. Lord bless you. I am not one of those people. So you can ask literally anything, but the goal is that we want to take a genuine interest in these students, in these people. We don't want to treat them like projects. Again, as Anna said, they'll see through that. They will know. You know how that feels when someone treats you like a project. It doesn't feel good. So yes, we want to take a genuine interest, ask really good questions.
Yeah. I always tell our missionaries, ask one more question than you feel comfortable with. So if you ask somebody, oh, how's your day? And then they say nice and be like, yeah, what's something that you've done this week that has, brought you joy? Ask one more question. Just you don't have to push that hard, but you can even have a question on lock and just one more, and you'll be amazed. Most people are actually pretty down to talk, and it'll be surprising and cool and refreshing for them. So I would say that. I would say with that, one of the questions you can ask is you can ask if there's anything that you can pray for people for. And if you ask that, do it, right? And then if you see them again, check in. And so that's another way to practice this. And I would also say, and I think you guys know this, like, sometimes the best way to, like, make things a little less awkward is just own that you're awkward. And so you can be like, hey, I know this is super weird, but I'm just trying to get better at talking to people. Like, how's your day going? And the person will probably chuckle a little bit and be like, nice job. It's going all right. And so it's okay to be a little awkward and own it.
Yeah, this is, like Kiana said, this is another thing that we ask our interns to do when they're first learning to neighbor. Like, if you don't know what to do, you can ask, how can I pray for you? Even people that aren't Christians will often have something that they would love for you to pray about for them. And then it's a very easy intro into your second conversation with them. I also left stacks of bookmarks on your tables. So if you want to use those, like, put this in your book, Bible, somewhere you're always going to see it, someone that you are praying for on your mirror. So feel free to take as many of those as you want. You can pass out to your students, use yourself. So another example, and you guys, I think college ministries are great at this application point, is plan easy invite events. So the goal is just to bring people together, facilitate really good conversation, get to know new people that are already in your orbit. These can be formal or they can be really personal. You can just invite a few people over and pull out whatever snack you have in your cabinet and whatever game is on your coffee table. So you don't have to overthink it. You don't have to buy anything special. Just show up with your presence and make your space available.
Cool. Last way to practice for me, rule of life, right? Consider this whole talk an invitation. Consider your resistances, and then ask yourself, what can I do daily, weekly, monthly, seasonally, to simply set myself up to grow a little bit more in this direction over time, right? So rule of life, like, that's really huge. In my personal rule of life, me and my roommate is back there, and we have an open house once a month, and we try to invite people from different areas of our lives, and we intentionally make it, like, really doable. Like, we do not do anything cool. We do not clean, really. We do not do anything. We do try to, like, have some drinks, and we just, like, send a text, like a mass text to whoever we think of. The first time we did it, nobody came. Like, zero. I'm not kidding. 0 people came, and we loved it because it was like really overwhelming thinking about this open house. We got ourselves like all geared up for it. We're gonna do so good, and literally we sat in the front yard and drank drinks. And Kiana didn't even come.
I didn't.
Yeah, she didn't come to the second one either. Yeah.
And I think I'm out of town for the third one.
Oh my God. Which brings us kind of to the fourth one, which is supposed to be Kiana's, but don't forget about the bonus step,
Yes.
which is fail well. If it like flops, if it doesn't work, don't let that stop you from trying things. Just try and then have a lovely night to yourself with your roommate or your, spouse, and drink drinks in the front yard and be like, hey, remember when we were trying to be faithful and we tried to throw an open house and nobody came? This is so fun. Like, it's okay. We can fail. Here you go, Kiana.
Yes, so like Anna said, don't think of the failure as failure, but, I can really learn a lot from this. Maybe it was the wrong night of the week. Maybe I can't come Saturday nights, I don't know. Or maybe, people just were busy. So kind of thinking through, like, why did this not work? Are there things that I can change that are easy? Sometimes it's just the method, sometimes it's the night of the week, sometimes other things were happening. And then other times there are things that the Lord, opportunities that he brings your way that were nowhere on your list of when you were thinking of neighboring and you were not prepared for this new opportunity that came your way. You can pivot. That's not a failure. That's just, learning from your mistakes and moving on. So don't let that stop you. Otherwise, neighboring will go nowhere. There will be lots of failures. That is something I can guarantee you, but that doesn't mean you have failed just because the method or the way didn't work out the way that you thought it would.
Yeah. All right, I think I'm landing the plane.
Yep.
All right. So people come to love that neighborhood because they value neighboring. It's in our name, love thy neighborhood. So they come because they care about these things. While they're with us, we give them this LTN lifestyle, this way to practice. We build margin into their schedule and forbid them from doing anything or planning anything with anybody outside, a radius of the house. So we say, hey, we're going to help you prioritize this for a little while. And then with time, they would tell you they would not want to live any other way. And we have people who come into our program valuing it, practicing it, and then they're straight up like moving to communities because they know, like my community, like that's where I'm having the most face time with people. And I can get to know the people who are, maybe there's not even a grocery store around, maybe it's just a liquor store, and you get to know the people there, and you get to know the people at the corner store, and you like get to know the people who live like on the block, like not even in a house, but like on the block. And like our students get practice doing that while they're with us, and then they are like moving places to do that there. And moving strategically because they have experienced what it's like to be attuned to what's going on around and have the Lord like actually give them opportunities to show his love to people in need. And it's really, really cool. So yeah, what started as curiosity for many of our folks and willingness to engage ends with a deep love for neighboring that, as I've said, has led to many of our alumni actually making life changes to prioritize, not only like our blocks, but life changes to prioritize this. So at the end of your handout, you're going to find some other tips and tricks that Kiana wrote up for you guys. I want to emphasize one last tip, though, which I said I was going to emphasize, which is you must model this for your students. And I'm not talking just like in programming, like, because really this stuff, it happens sometimes with the open houses and sometimes with the ice cream socials and the pancake nights and that sort of stuff. But like, those are just events. This is sort of a way of being in the world. Like the invitation that I think we see in the Good Samaritan is like, be people who, when the Lord gives you opportunities in your day-to-day life, to notice, which requires being open to that. Like people around you, like take them, notice, see, meet the needs that you can't. Don't promise things that you can't do. But yeah, like this has to be a part of your way of life, and your students will still, you still need the ice cream socials, you still need the pancake dinners, but they're gonna see you stop and talk to the random person who's not involved in your ministry, or know the name of the person at the Jimmy John's or whatever it is, and they're going to start emulating that, and you can talk about it, right? And so bring them alongside you second. I would say model first, bring them alongside you second, and then encourage them to go out and do these things on their own third. I think this time, I don't know our end time, but I think we might have time for questions this time. I cut off questions last night. It wasn't because I was scared or didn't want to. I just didn't have time. 3 minutes, you said? We have time for one question. Kiana will answer it.
Jesus, that's the answer.
Does anybody actually have any questions or thoughts? Anything that like stuck out from any of this? It's okay if not.
I felt like that you said maybe.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like that's going back to, like, I'm thinking of your teaching, like the triangle of how we're formed, like the community. Like, it wasn't, what was taught around the bonfire, but it was the fact that that community showed up and did life, and that really impacted you. And I think that's like a very real example of like, wow, those people showing up, those community really formed me. And I think that's really special.
Yeah. Everybody wants to go to dinner and the baseball game. Cool. I think we're done here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.